Y'all know what it is.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to an insightful episode of Eggs. Today's special guest is Bew White. Bew is the chairman of the board at Gabriella White, along with its family of brands, Summer Classics, Gabby, and Wendy Jane. Bew graduated from Auburn University in 1972 with a degree in textile engineering. Shortly thereafter, he went to work at Avondale Mills, his family-owned textile manufacturer. After 6 years and at just 28 years old, Bew left the nest and founded his own company, Vista Corporation, which specialized in selling outdoor furniture. Now, keep in mind that this was at a time when outdoor furniture was thought of as little more than a table and chairs left on the patio. After a series of wins and certainly some losses, Bew set to work on expansion, hoping to take his business from selling furniture on the road to a national brand. His idea, Summer Classics, was built on a consumer-driven approach of manufacturing the kind of products that would stand the test of time and never go out of style. This concept panned out, and his company officially took flight in 1987. Since then, Bew has received numerous awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Casual Furnishings Association, and has become the subject of a well-received biography, A Summer Classic, The Bew White Story, written by Christopher Taunton. Joining us today for a conversation about his standout career in the outdoor furniture industry, what it means to live a truly successful life, how to thrive in turbulent times, and of course, about his book, please join us in welcoming to the show, Bew White. Hey, Bew, how are you?
Super. Great to see you.
Excellent. We are so excited to have this conversation. So neither of us actually had an opportunity to see your book prior to our discussion. But from what I've read, I've seen some great reviews. I've seen some interesting things, and I've seen some of your appearances on other podcasts. And I'm really excited to have our opportunity to visit with you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great book. I agree with you.
Well, excellent. Well, let's just get started at the beginning. And I know you've got, quite the career to talk about, but let's maybe start a little bit in the early years and talk about sort of your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. It was, I call it an MBA in mistakes. I just went from mistake to mistake, failure to the great teacher. So I just constantly failed. One of the things you mentioned I love that intro because it's got all the good stuff in there, but there's a lot of cases where I just, I left my family company and I actually bought a part of the company and I had to leave in 9 months. It was a disaster. And I walked away from 25%. I put 25% of my net worth, which wasn't a lot back then, but it was like $100,000. I put 25 grand and I lost it. I was like, right after whoa, I'm going to lose all money. And I had to start my own business and I could do this. I started doing really well, but then I started having to collect my commissions, which I never thought I would have to collect commission checks. And I would call the person that's paying me commissions like, hey, I haven't got my check yet. And they go like, well, we're having cash flow problems. I was like, I'm a cash flow problem? I was like, what does that mean? It was like, help. So I just constantly learned a lot from making mistakes. And now from there, I started a whole bunch of companies because I was on the road. I was on the road selling. I was making close to $250,000 a year. I'd gone from making $25,000 when I left Avondale Mills to making 200 something thousand, and which was great, but I was gone all the time. And my kids were like, we don't even know who our dad is. And I was like, I got to do something about this. So that was my reason for starting a whole bunch of different companies to see what would work, that I could escape from being on the road all the time. Little did I know the company was going to take all my time to build. But fortunately, once I built it, the children realized I was doing it for them. I really wasn't doing it for myself, because by the time I got, by the time it worked, most of my career had run out, and they came into the company and they realized it was a gem. So it's very cool to have that happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. Well, and one of the things I want to point out too, and I mean, I wouldn't say it was, late in life or anything, but I like to showcase sort of these, the tries and the fails. And then the fact that like you didn't really get your big hit, like you didn't come out of college and strike it rich at 22 years old, or anything like that. Like, I mean, it was, it took a certain amount of building and a certain amount of experience over years to, I guess, finally get all the pieces to come together. And I think that's an important thing to illustrate for people, because I think, especially in sort of today's social media culture and all that stuff, I think it feels like if you're 36 years old and haven't figured out your life yet, that you're somehow behind the eight ball, and it's almost too late for you. When in reality, people, in your case, and even I used to work for a guy who, same thing, he had his first New York Times bestseller at 45 years old. And so, and his career went in gangbusters after that. So, so I really love these stories of sort of trials and tribulations and perseverance and all that stuff, because I think they're really great for people to see.
Yeah. Have you read Shoe Dog, the Phil Knight story
Yes.
about?
Yes, it's really good.
This story is very similar to that, except not as big a company. But I love the part. Do you remember the part where he's like, they're bouncing his payroll checks?
Yeah.
I was like, wow, I had some pretty difficult banking. He had some really difficult banking situations at Nike. Well, it was actually called Blue Ribbon at the time, but he had some very difficult banking situations. And mine is very similar to that. Mine is much like It's a Wonderful Life, except that I didn't try to kill myself. I really think that the analogy there of the great marriage and the trying to make it work and pushing through difficult times, I mean, that's really what it's about.
So can you maybe tell us about the first year of starting the business and maybe your first product that you launched, the process you went through of making the product and the process of actually getting it out there to your clients?
Okay. Well, when I was in New York with Avondale Mills selling fabric, one of the first guys I called on, I actually, you have to go into the head office and say, I'd like to call on this account. And the account I really wanted to call on was Ralph Lauren, because I was kind of watching what he was doing. I was like fascinated. And I went and called on them, and they were interested in buying stuff from us, but they couldn't meet our minimums. But I was like, how does this work? Y'all seem like you're really different than our normal account, because we were selling to cutters and everything was cut and sewn in the United States back then. And so we would call them like Levi Strauss or Bluebell, which was Wrangler, HD Lee. Those were the big accounts there. Hortex, which is, this just the Garanimals. I don't know if you remember that stuff. Anyway, those were our big accounts. But Ralph Lauren was actually having other people make his stuff. And so I was like, how does this work? And he said, well, we concentrate on marketing and design. And then we have people make things to our specification. So they have, cut and sew is cut and sew. You may have more stitches per inch, but if you use the right materials and you have it and the quality is good, you can be in any product. And we can, as long as we know how to design it, we have a taste level, we can design anything and have it, have people make it for us and put our brand on it and sell it. We can even go into women's wear, which they weren't in at the time. They were only doing like ties and shirts back then. And they were just getting into khakis, and that's how I kind of got with them. And so I was like, man, this is a great business model, because it gives you a lot of flex. You can move, and you're not dependent on what the factory makes. So when I got into selling, I was selling products that the factories were making, and then the market would change, and I would go like, changing, and I need to pivot. These guys need to pivot, because they'd come to me and said, wow, you were selling tons of our stuff and you're not selling as much. You need to sell more of our stuff. I said, well, the market has gone to this. If you'll make that, I'll sell it. And they were like, we can't make that. Our factory makes this, right? And that's all we can make. And I was like, well, boy, somebody needs to smell the market, figure it out, and have people make what the market wants. And so that's kind of when I started the company, that's what I started it with. What I didn't see coming was the amount of demand for the product that I would have. So I started designing product that I thought was what I liked. And we doubled every 3.5 years. So, and to your point, I can remember when we hit our first $1 million, we were like going, man, whoa, celebrate. Like we sold $1 million, or we shipped $1 million. And so that was a big deal. I mean, it took a really long time just to get to $1 million. I can't tell you how many years, but it was an incredible amount of time just to go from 0 to $1 million. And then from $1 million to 5 was another long period of time, 5 to 10, 10 to 20. But we doubled every 3.5 years. So 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8. That's kind of how it went. And so because of that, I always looked at the future and said, if we're going to double every 3.5 years, when do we get to 500 million? Because that was kind of my goal. Is we're going to take about for the 2nd recession. And so all these, it's how you deal with the set. Oddly enough, it's not how you deal with the growth, which is fun. It's how you deal with the setbacks. And then how do you make sure you don't go out of business from the setbacks? And I think that if I could teach anybody that, that's what the book teaches. It's the grit to push through when it seems impossible, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's really important. And obviously it's a key aspect of your story. I wondered though, if you talk a little bit about just, I guess maybe and maybe this is sort of the precursor to that last bit, but it's sort of the inspiration or the bravery or whatever it took to sort of leave the family business. And the reason I ask is, first, I mean, Avondale Mills was a pretty historic company. I mean, they did, a lot of work for a lot of big brands, things like that. But then, so was there already pressure on you to become entrepreneurial? And was there like any sort of, I guess, pressure or, something coming from the family to stay in the business? Like, why would you abandon us? Why would you leave us? Was there any of that kind of relationship stuff going on that you had to sort of overcome and work past? And how did you find your way?
It's a great question, because when I got out of college, I was a textile engineer. I kind of said, this is what I want to do. I want to go in the family business. Nobody in my generation is in there. And then I was the first one to come in. I was like, catbird seat, this is incredible. I'm the first and the 4th generation to come in. And so my great grandfather started it back in the 1800s, and it had become a Fortune 500 company. I was like, so I really didn't know how to run a business. So, I was 22 years old, but I'd been really successful. But then four of my cousins came in after me. I was like, this is going to be a bloodbath. I'm going to get to be 50 and I'm going to not be able to, there's going to be a competition to be president. And I don't want to get in this fight with my cousins. And then I had something else happen. So I was calling jobbers. You know what a jobber is? It's somebody in the fabric business. It was somebody that bought fabric at really low prices and then jobbed it out to smaller that you wouldn't sell. So they would buy for $1 and they may sell for $1.10 or $1.25 or whatever. Or some of the jobbers would buy and then they had their own cut and sew, or would job out the cut and sew and have a really good deal on the jeans or the pants or whatever shirts or whatever they were making. So one day I got to be really good friends with one of the jobbers, and he had about 3 employees in his office. And since we were public, I could see what everybody was paid at the executive level inside Avondale Mills. So I went out to lunch with him one day. I said, hey, you mind telling me how much do you pay yourself? Because I'm interested in small business. And he said, no, I'll tell you. And he gave me a number, and it was more than the president of Avondale Mills made, who was my cousin. And I kind of went, wow, that seems like a lot less complicated, less politics, way to go. So in the back of my mind was, I need to go off on my own. And so I got a transfer. It was a promotion to move, and I had gotten transferred from New York City to Birmingham, and now they were going to transfer me to Greensboro, North Carolina. And I really wanted to stay in my hometown, so I was like, okay, this is my chance to leave. And I found my father, who was on the board of Avondale Mills, actually helped me find somewhere to go, because he was a lawyer, a corporate lawyer to big companies, but that had started from scratch. And he could see that if you could do it and do it right, you could make a lot of money. So he encouraged me instead of discouraging me from going off on my own. So I'm sort of a Ralph Lauren guy. And the first thing he found for me was a dog food company. And I went in there and there was rats and mice all over the place. I was like, Dad, this doesn't feel right to me. It's like, so then he found this furniture company. And I went in and like, okay, I can do something with this. This has a design element to it. And it was a disaster. I just tell you, I put my 25% of my net worth and lost it really quick. But then I went off on my own from there and started doing well. And so that's sort of did I leave anything out on your question?
No, I don't think so. I think that clears it up. I mean, because really what I was interested in was trying to understand this sort of family dynamic, right? I mean, especially when you think of these sort of legacy companies that have been in the family for a long time. I think your point actually is quite, astute, this point where family is coming in and now it's getting messy. It's one thing if it's father to son, maybe kind of operation, but something like this that goes out to a broader family. I mean, I could see that it would get complex really fast.
Yeah. And we had 5,000 plus employees and we're a public company. And my cousin was running it at the time. I didn't have much interaction with him because he was a good bit older than me, but I was scared to leave, frankly, because I had an incredible job and security. Here's the part that surprised me. They went out of business. So they sold the company after I left. The family sells the company, and then the whole market changes where everything's going overseas. Initially, it went to South America and Latin America, all Latin America, Mexico, all down. And then it started going to China. And once it started going to China, whoa, everybody kind of went, we can't make fabric in the United States. They're making it over there for half our price. And then they're making the jeans for half that price.
Yeah.
And I can remember what I paid for an Oxford cloth shirt back because I started in the haberdashery business before I went to college, before I got out of college. And I could buy a shirt now for half of what I paid back then. So it really killed the price. That's why the global economics has really been helpful to the United States because price points actually went down. And that's a problem we have now. Everybody's talking about us bringing everything back to the United States, but we've got 500 million people in China making stuff for us right now. You can't bring that back here. It's just not going to work. So that's a bigger topic, but I think that's globalization we need globalization. Let's put it that way to keep our price points down.
So your first go at it was a furniture business. Was it outdoor furniture? And then what did you change after that first kind of failure to succeed in your next one?
Yeah, the company here in Birmingham that I bought part of was in the contemporary, was really in modern. And everybody thinks I'm a traditionalist, but it forced me to learn a lot about modern furniture. And then I went on the road selling modern furniture. And I ran into this guy selling outdoor furniture. He said, that stuff you're selling, you can't sell very much of that. This is a great line. You should, and they're putting a plant in Atlanta and you should go pick it up. So I did. And I was like, wow, this is way easier to sell and there's not much competition and I can learn the market. And so I spent a lot of time learning the outdoor furniture business. And then I got where, when I decided to start my own company to get away from selling on the road, I didn't like what I was selling. And I knew what everybody in the outdoor furniture business made. And I didn't really like anything anybody made that I wanted for myself. And I kind of went, I wonder if people would like what I like. And if they did, then maybe if they like what I like, then maybe I could sell it to other baby boomers. So I started Summer Classics. That's a great story about how I started Summer Classics, because I really stole the idea from somebody else, but he agreed. But anyway, there was a guy, one of my dealers had started a brand, Summer Classics, in his basement. And I called on him. I was like, wow, who's doing this? He said, it's me. And I was like, what are you doing? He said, well, I just got this guy making these Adirondack chairs for me. I came up with that name. So I couldn't forget the name. And I went back to Birmingham and started, my father was an attorney. I said, how do I brand a name? And started working on that. He said, you can't have that. That other guy, he started it. He gets to have it. Okay. I said, okay, well, then how can I get it? Well, he can agree to give it to you. So I said, okay, well, start working on the trademark and then I'll see. So they came back and said, okay, you can get the trademark. So I called him. I said, what are you doing with that summer classics? He said, nothing. The guy went out of business. I'm not doing anything with it. Can I have it? Yeah, you can have it. Will you sign something? Yeah. I was like, okay, good. So here I go. So I shifted from painted wooden furniture to wrought iron, and I moved to Mexico. I moved from United States, everything made in the United States, to Chile. Chile was the first NAFTA person. A lot of people don't realize that Chile was the first North American Free Trade Agreement partner. And then Mexico and Canada came in later. So I had gone to Chile and worked on making market umbrellas and outdoor furniture down there. And then Mexico comes in. I moved to Mexico. Then I moved to China. And that really took me off because the Chinese government was supporting all the factories and giving them money for equipment or anything, basically not charging them any interest. They could buy equipment and borrow the money from the government. And they would subsidize anything they would sell overseas. I think a lot of people don't realize this, but China was set up to get dollars. All right. So all these factories, the RMB is not usable anywhere but in China. The renminbi, the yuan, whatever you want to call it, their denomination can't be used outside of China. So they've got to get dollars or euros in their country to go buy oil, for example, or other products that they don't have, food, whatever it is their people need. So they were subsidizing these plants to sell product outside, mostly in the United States, to get dollars into the country to go out and buy the things they needed for the country that they didn't have. So then I moved to China, and that really business took off dramatically from there. So, am I talking too much?
No, that's why we have you on. Can you talk about so like working with Chile or these other countries? Jumping around like that has to kind of be a learning curve. Can you maybe talk about the first time you moved and worked with China and some of the hurdles you had to overcome?
I'll tell you real quick. I'll tell you the Chile, Mexico, China scenario. So Chile, I go down there, I start working with them. The factories, again, it becomes a captive factory. They sell a little bit in Chile, but Santiago is about the only place I can sell it. So you're probably not going to remember this, but back in the the early 90s, everything was moving down there. And then, of course, that's where the wine and the salmon fishing and all the stuff that came in from Chile came about. But the exchange rate got screwed up. And so they raised my prices 20% on my incoming containers.
Oh, wow.
And I had probably a 35% gross margin. But I was like, guys, you can't do that to me. I need a chance to raise my prices to my clients, and I can't raise my prices retroactively. And I have all these orders. So I'm like going, and I'm selling everything I can get. I was like, I just had to eat that. And I was like, man, that's a lesson you want to learn. That's FX exchange. If it's a long story, but I was like, I'm going to figure out a way not to do business with you because I can't work like this. And I'd already started working with Mexico. And so I had a very similar situation happen in Mexico where if you watch the peso and how it changes, it's pretty dramatic how the peso changes. So once I got to China, everything stabilized. China was, I've got some great China stories if you've got time.
We got time.
China was an amazing place because they had pegged the RMB to the dollar. So you didn't have much fluctuation. And then the U.S. government was allowing this to happen. It's kind of getting loose right now. So they're not raising our rates. We're the largest importer in the state of Alabama. So, it would affect dramatically if the RMB was changing, and it has in the past, but the RMB is getting worth less, not worthless, but worth less. And so it's really helping us not to have increased prices. Here's a great quick story about, not quick, but interesting story about China. So I start working with China. This is back in 1999, 2000. And we're working on cast aluminum in Mexico. And we have a competitor from China start selling at lower than we can buy the product for at cost. And we're like, we need to go to China and figure out what's going on. So I have a guy, I start trying to do some designs, and I have to do, if you're doing cast aluminum, it's made, you make forms, and it's very detailed, and you have to have perfect drawings so that they can carve it out of wood and then dip it in sand and then make the first molds. It's mold making. It's very complicated from that standpoint. After you get the mold, it's very easy to do. So we're working on the first products, and I get a cold call, and this guy says, "Hey, this is David from China. I would like to make an appointment with you." I said, "Okay." I'm like, "Boy, this is perfect." So I make an appointment with him for 2.5 weeks later, and he calls me back to reconfirm at about 14 days in. I was like, "You know what? I need to move the appointment." So I move it back 10 days. So he comes in the front door, and we walk him around. He's all excited, and it's o'clock in the morning, and we walk around and talk to him, and then we kind of sit down at a conference table, and we meet till about 11:30, 12 o'clock. So, okay, well, let's go to lunch. He says, "Oh, I need to get Susie out of the car." I was like, "There's somebody out in the car. It's summer, so it's like 100 degrees here." We're like, so we have a little porch, and then our offices that back then were on a little river. And the river's, the parking's out by the river. And so we watch him as he goes out and gets her out of this white Camry. And he comes back in to the office and introduces us as, "Hey, Susie, how are you? Nice to meet you. Are you okay?" We've been out the car a long time. Chinese can handle a lot more than we can. So I said, "Okay, all right, I need to get this straight. Now, David, how did you get my name?" He said, "Well, I went to the Casual Living magazine." That was the trade magazine at the time. "And I called all the manufacturers to see, who would give me an appointment to make cast aluminum." I said, "Well, how'd that work out for you?" "Well, you were the only one that would meet with me." I was like, "So where have you been?" "Los Angeles." And I'm in Alabama. So I said, "Well, that Camry, you rented that from the airport, right?" He said, "No, I drove." "You drove from where?" "From Los Angeles." I was like, "Whoa, who's Susie?" "Well, she's a friend of my boss in China, and he let me stay with her." And I was like, so we had an appointment. I made an appointment with you because we're a week late. It's been almost 4 weeks. "What have you been doing for 4 weeks?" "I've been waiting for the appointment in California." Like, oh my God, I'm going to figure out how to do business with you. "Tell me about your boss." Well, he describes this arms dealer in China who's been doing arms for the government, right? Who's transferred, and he's got all the friends in the government to get all the money, and they're giving him the money to make stuff for him. We're like, wow, that sounds like Vito Corleone of China. It was like incredible. "So why did he send you over here?" He said, "Well, I speak English, and we didn't have anybody else to speak English." "So what did he say to you?" He said, "You go to US and don't come back till you have a customer." "Okay, we're going to make sure you don't get killed going back. We'll be your customer." So they were all excited to see me when we got there. I mean, I've got numerous stories like that are fascinating.
Well, yeah, no, it's interesting, just sort of the cultural divide, and the amount of effort that would go into something like that.
Yeah, and he's David.
For one, I mean,
he wasn't really David. They all changed their names. Think of us having Chinese names.
Sure.
Yeah. So they've all changed their names so that we can remember. So all of my staff over there all have English names and Chinese names, but we refer to them, and some of them we gave them their name. So
it's an army of Bobs over there.
Very different culture.
Yep. So after he built that relationship with you and kind of got the first thing going, was it just that one product that you went with them? And then after that first product, did you kind of just expand from there? Same person or same company? Or do you work with multiple different manufacturers in China now?
I work with that, but my whole concept became very much like the Ralph Lauren model, which was captive factories. So I want the factory. And first of all, I'm going to make a high-end product. And China was set up for mass. So I've got to teach them the difference between a cheap price and how do you make a really good product that can last for 20 years and 7 years, just set up for everything last year. And Walmart and those guys don't even expect it to last that long. So yes, I became really good friends with the Godfather, and then I negotiated a deal. This really ended up being an incredible deal where I didn't have to pay for the tooling. Well, the tooling for a dining table, would be $100,000. But I was already getting offers from other factories in China saying, no tooling charge, no tooling charge. I was like, wow, that's an incredible deal. Because when working with Mexico, and the tooling charges on a single chair were going to be $40,000. I was like, man, I got to do as much product as possible, as quick as possible, because this is not going to last. And it didn't. Eventually, they came to us and said, we're not going to pay for tooling anymore. And so we started splitting tooling, but we could never make the numbers work. So eventually we had to just kind of start, as the sales slowed down and we couldn't design new product, we had to start dropping all that product. But it was an incredible relationship while it lasted. They were selling us basically at the aluminum price of the cost of the material.
Wow.
And so you follow me? So
Yeah.
when we first went over there, they would weigh a chair and give us a price. And then the first time they gave us a price, I was like, that's about a price of an ingot. They're not charging us anything for labor, anything for finish material, anything for packaging. We're basically paying the cost of aluminum for our chairs.
That's incredible.
There's got to be a ton of subsidies involved here.
Yeah.
The first thought we had, can you hear me? Okay, because it kind of froze. The first thought we had is if we hadn't come over here, we could be put out of business by somebody like us, because you can't compete if you're not over here negotiating these kind of price points.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I wonder too, in your experience in working in China and other sort of, I don't know, outside of United States countries, working in Mexico and other places like that, did you ever run into problem with copyright infringement or people stealing IP, any of that kind of stuff?
I'm running into it right as we speak. And I have contracts with the manufacturer. And the manufacturer, this is my largest manufacturer, which I have a big story about that. He's starting to make product for my competitor, and he's taken my product and, according to him, changed it 25%.
That's why the tooling fees are free.
Yes. And selling it to my competitor. And I have a contract with him that he can't do that. He said, well, I've changed it. And I can't I have an agent, this particular factory, I have an agent. I'm like, you need to make him hold his feet to the fire on this contract, and he won't do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm aware. I mean, I have a couple clients in my agency over the years that we've done some manufacturing in China, and we've run into numerous problems with copyright infringement, primarily in rotomolding and silicon molding and products that are made that way. And they just, the company that's doing the manufacturing is also selling it online under another name. It's like, and even with the, the foreign attorneys and the contracts and things like that, it's a real challenge.
Yeah, what we could do is tortious interference with a contract with the people here in the United States. That would be the way to go about it if it was worth it. Or another way to do it is be nimble and drop the products and come out with new products that they don't make and can't copy because they don't know how to make it. Because most of the products we make are pretty complicated, but you could change them a little bit and they would, they're still complicated, but they still look the same.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like one of those things that, at least from what I've heard, so many people just kind of have to wash their hands of it and just let it happen to them, right? Because, either you don't want to give up your manufacturer or you don't want to, lose your price point or whatever, so they really do, in some cases, have you over kind of a, between a rock and a hard place.
Well, think about what's happening right now. My feeling is the Iron Curtain has gone back up on China. You can't go in, you can't come out, you can't. Fortunately, I have staff over there, but if I didn't, I don't know how I would design new product. So we're doing all the designs with our staff there and Zoom calls, showing the product to do the samples, I'm thinking, man, if it's possible to get this done remotely. You follow me? Because we used to go over there hands on, get the sample, they tweak it, and we're doing it remotely now. It's actually saving us a lot of money, but I don't know how you're going to compete with somebody like us.
You must really trust your staff there to be able to still, have the quality in mind, because if, for example, if you're doing everything remotely and you got a batch coming in, you sure hope the first batch is up to your standards, because you don't want it to get here, have a bunch of product you can't sell.
Well, that's what the staff's there for. The staff was originally there for quality control. So they're watching go to the plant and at finish to make sure they're keeping the specs. But then we've used them now for product development, which wasn't the original intention, but it's working.
Good.
Yeah.
That's
well, I think that's a good sign, or, it's maybe something to talk about, or a point in the spirit of being agile and being nimble, figuring out how to adapt to change in world conditions and things like that. Cause obviously, working in a foreign country, you're sort of a little bit at the behest of the foreign country. So it's I guess inspiring to hear that you've been able to sort of adapt and make it work. So, but you said something that just got me thinking, or maybe it was Mike's question talking about sort of just quality control and things like that. I heard a story that you were telling, and maybe this probably predates your relationships in China, but I believe you were working in South America with some people manufacturing chairs, and there was a paint problem and a factory sale, et cetera. I wondered if you wouldn't mind just sort of telling that story, because I think it's kind of a fun story, or sort of, I guess, the rising from the ashes story about how you got into retail.
Yeah, that's one of those MBA mistakes, and I'm working on my PhD. So when we started in this painted wooden furniture, I had developed a product which I think was one of the best products we ever made. So pressure treated pine. I was having a problem with, I was using cypress, and so I'm switching to pressure treated pine, and you have to cut around all the knots because the knots will bleed through the paint. And of course, they're not very attractive anyway. And I'd gotten Chile to pressure treat the pine and then kiln dry it, because you can't have all that moisture in there or the paint will come off. And then paint over that. And I got a huge contract from Williams Sonoma. Williams Sonoma owned a company called Gardner's Eden at the time. And so they became our biggest customer. And they put this on the cover of their catalog. And I went down to Chile and I said, this is a big order. I can't do it all. I want you to do, y'all put on the first two finishes and I'll put on the last two. And then I worked on all the specs with the paint supplier, and everything worked beautifully. And so we shipped 10 truckloads. Fortunately, it was to Memphis, is where their big warehouse was. So it wasn't that far from him. And I also shipped some of my other clients, and I got a call from a client in Atlanta that said, "Hey, I got your product. It looks great, but it rained this weekend."
Oh, no.
I went, "Okay, what?" He said, "It's already peeling." I'm like, "Oh my God." And I wasn't worried about him. He had bought like one set of furniture. So I got in my car and ran over there and looked at it. I was like, "Okay, this is going to be a huge problem for me." So we came over, started taking the garden hose and spraying the furniture to see what would peel and what wouldn't. But we had done some of it completely there at the plant, and some of it was coming in later, and we were using the finish from Chile. Turns out Chile had switched the finish to save money and use a different finish, and it wouldn't bond to the finish that we were putting on afterwards. So I called Williams Sonoma and said, "I'm going to have to recall all that product, and I'm going to have to remake it." And they said, "Oh my God, we're selling the heck out of it. It's on the cover of the catalog." I said, "I'm sorry, but we got to start over." So it was 10 truckloads. They sent it back to me. I had nowhere to put it. I was like going crazy. It's one of those growth spurts. So I leased 10 containers. You could lease it. Back then you could lease a container, an empty container, a 40-foot container for $100 a month. So I leased 10 containers, and I stuffed it all in those containers. And I kind of went, "What am I going to do with this stuff? This is incredible." I was call accounts, and of course I'd tell them what's wrong with it, and they were like, "No thanks." So I finally decided I would have a sale at the factory. And this was such a big risk for me because I had my money tied up in that. I'm remanufacturing the stuff. I've got to get my money out of the stuff on the container. So I decided to spend $10,000 in the local paper. And this is back in the 90s. That was a lot of money in paper. And I needed the paper because you didn't have cell phones, so you couldn't find a way to get to the factory without a map. And I had to put a map in the paper of how to get to us. And I ran an ad called Summer Classics Opens the Factory to the Public. And I had to run it on the weekend only because we had to work during the week to get out the other product. So we set up the factory, that Friday night and got everything ready and priced everything. And I get there the next morning and it doesn't start till like 10 o'clock. I got there at 9 o'clock and man, cars parked everywhere all along the street. And I was like, oh my God, I hope this works. I hope they like it and buy it. And they did. And they bought, we couldn't get it off the containers fast enough and get it set up to get it out to the product, to the customers.
Wow.
And so that worked. And then I was like, okay, I got $50,000 that weekend. I was like, hey, payroll. And I had, once a month like that. And it worked every time. I actually called a dealer in town and says, how long is this going to work? He's like, I don't know. Probably it's not going to work very long, maybe a couple more months. I was like, well, I'm going to do it till it stops. Anyway, that was the beginning of us getting in retail. So now we have 21 stores, and it's a big part of what we do.
That's yeah. And I wanted to ask you about that too, just because it's such a transition, right, from being just the manufacturer to now trying to manage retail stores. And in some of the work we did before the show, I heard now you've got independent owners that are running shops and things like that. But I mean, in those early days, and I don't know how many of your stores are factory owned, but I mean, are there some growing pains or some real learning moments that you've come across in making that transition? Because it seems to me that the business plan is totally different for the manufacturer than it is for the retail store.
Well, we sell dealers, that means that we sell where are you located?
We're out in Salt Lake City.
So think of all there's one that's owned by Warren Buffett out there where you are. I can't remember what the name of it is, but there's a bunch of different stores, furniture stores and patio stores in your area. So those are our customers. So you can imagine you're selling them and then suddenly you put a Summer Classic store right on top of them. And that's the challenge. You piss them off.
Sure.
I can't tell you how many calls I had in the early days when we were starting this of what the hell are you doing? I was like, well, usually this doesn't work like you think it's going to work. It creates a brand and people want to buy more of it from you. And we don't really discount. And I'm not telling you can't sell at a lower price than us. I prefer you didn't. And maybe it'll make us mad and get sideways with you. But I think you're going to find you're going to sell more product than less. And by the way, this particularly when you had a licensee, if you drop the line, you can't get it back. So be careful, dropping the line. I know you want to drop the line and you're mad, but if you do, you can't get it back. And then people come in your store asking for it. I wasn't Apple at the time, but I'm not Apple now, but I'm more like, a brand. I'm a brand that they need. So it got them mad, but they ended up, selling more product so it became a huge positive. So that was the problem initially. And now I think they're a little nervous about, am I going to come into their market? But now I have licensees. So out of the 21 stores, 6 are licensees, and there's 2 more licensed stores open in the next 12 months. So I'd love it if there were more licensees because they actually do better than our company-owned stores because they're there every day. It's their business. It's not like hiring a manager to run your store. It's the owner, that owns it that's there every day. So they do a better job, and they make a lot of money. Some of these stores make $500,000 or more a year.
That's great. Let's switch topics here. You put a book out, and that's obviously why you're here. You want to tell us a little bit about your book? Tell us about the process of writing it, and Yeah. Who's Chris?
Let's go to the why first. So 2013, I almost died. I got in, because I went to China, I've been to China 29 times. I had blood clot issues. And I think these are genetic, but I didn't realize and I got a bunch of blood clots in my legs, and my leg was killing me. And I was out of town. I was in Atlanta. I said, I got to go to the hospital. So I got to Piedmont Hospital emergency room, and they do a Doppler radar on my leg. And they're like, you got a ton of blood clots in your legs. I said, well, I can't breathe. And so they did a CT scan on my lungs and said, wow, you got 5 in your lungs. We're going to hold you here overnight. So the next morning,
Wow.
I had my heart stopped, where I had a blood clot go through and stop my heart. You can't imagine what that's. So I thought it was heartburn to start with, and I've had heartburn. This is not heartburn. It's like, you're going to die. You got a signal to your brain, you're going to die, and you have a few minutes to live. And I was like, okay, this is it. I got to say whatever I'm going to say. Fortunately, my wife wasn't there, and she came in, and I was pushing the nurse to come in, and they weren't answering me. And finally they came on and said, Mr. White, what's wrong? I was like, I'm going to die, and it's going to be quick. I've got minutes left. Suddenly I had 8 nurses in there, and they were turning my bed. You know, how you can watch TV and the thing goes up. Well, it goes down where your feet are higher than your head. And then they filled me full of dopamine and salt water, and I came back, and I was 100% sure I was dead. And then I wasn't. I was like, and so it was so emotional. If you've ever seen the movie Captain Phillips, Tom Hanks played the perfect position there at the end, where he's getting off the boat and he's crying uncontrollably and he can't talk. I was like that for hours. And I showed it to my wife. I was like, look, Tom Hanks, that's exactly what I was like. She said, yeah, that was it. And so then I got the signal, like, write the book. And I'd been working on it, but I can't write. And so I've really spent a lot of time after that saying, I gotta get this book done. And so I paid a lot of money to people to write a chapter. And finally I found this guy who just got out of seminary, and his father was a writer, and I knew his father really well. He's a great writer. So I said, if you'll work with him on it, let's do this. And so we did. And I think he did a really good job on writing it. But it was really a grandfather. It's a grandchild to grandchild. In other words, the idea is to show your grandchildren what it took, assuming that they inherit part of this, what your grandchildren's grandchildren know what really happened. Like, I was always interested in my great-grandfather starting Avondale Mills and becomes this huge company. What was that like? And he's got 4 books. They're fascinating about him. He was a fascinating guy. So I wanted the same kind of ability of my great-great-grandchildren to see that.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really interesting perspective. I mean, and maybe it did take this sort of, near-death experience to spur that on, or sort of this interest in legacy. Obviously, I haven't had anything so dire happen to myself, but I've just noticed, as I age, that I seem to have more interest in leaving legacy. And so it's interesting that it took something like that to, I guess, prioritize doing something like this. Obviously, you're a really busy guy, you're working a lot, and now you've got to factor in doing this book. But I think in the long run, especially, assuming that children and grandchildren and so on end up inheriting this thing, I think it is really important to understand where it comes from, especially, with this sort of intergenerational wealth or, whatever degree. I think it's really important that people understand where it comes from, because you always hear about that second or third generation sort of squandering it. And I think that context is a big part of it.
It is. It's I loved reading my stuff about my grandfather and have you read Washington, A Life, the Ron Chernow book? That's an incredible book that after you read it, you go, we wouldn't be here without this guy. He was amazing. I mean, I knew Washington was amazing, but not to the degree that you get inside a book like that, where it gives a detail of everything he did.
Yeah, I did the Grant version, not the Washington.
The Grant, yeah, I watched. I read the Grant book too. It's a little tougher to read than the Washington book, because you kind of know he's going to die at the end. And you get to the end where he's going to die, and you're like, okay, the scars are getting him, and here we go. And it's just a little tougher.
Well, no, but I think it's so important too. And I know that it's something that's really important to you, but I mean, really sales and business and everything is so much about relationships. And I think, documenting your life or putting these stories into, book form, allow people to have a relationship with you even beyond, life, I guess, so in the case of your great grandfather, you probably feel closer to him maybe than you might have been without having had those books to lean on.
And getting your kids in the business. I mean, that was one of the difficult things for me, is even having my son in here, he was really pushing back on running the business. And I was like, what do I got to do to get you to run the business? And he said, well, I'll do it if you'll do EOS. I was like, okay, what's EOS? It's Entrepreneur Operating System. Remember that guy came and talked to us? I was like, I don't remember, but let's do it. I'm okay. Whatever it is, I'm sure I'll like it. Let's do it. So that really got him, he said, we just needed more structure. I was like, great.
Well, and I'm curious. So, I mean, and we're getting a little late here, so I'll try and keep this short. But so your background obviously was in engineering, textile engineering. Then you went to what seems like a bizarre leap, which is sales, right? You don't think of engineers as being salespeople. You're obviously very prolific at this, and I mean, I can tell just from our conversation here, you're very congenial, you're easy to get along with, you probably, are fun to talk to. So that probably helps in a sales capacity. But was there anything, and this is sort of a general question for young entrepreneurs who might have doubts about who they are or where they are, or if they're doing things the right way. What role did formal education play in your entrepreneurial experience? How much of it was just a mentorship and learning on the road? For people who can't see it here because the camera hasn't switched, we're getting the big zero signs. And the reason I ask is that, I come from a really non-traditional background too. Public education, university education didn't do a lot for me in my business. And, for, I think a lot of people, and again, back to our comments at the very top of the show about social media and sort of this idea that there's a right way and a wrong way and all this stuff, which, illustrated by your story, there's clearly not a direct path. But I wondered, just if you could sort of think about the breadth of your career and think about the things that were most impactful for you, the skills that were, necessary in order for you to take that next step, or, what were the things, if you could point out anything to a young entrepreneur that might have doubt or might be unsure of what they're doing or whatever, is there anything that you've got from a, storied carear?
Yeah. There's a book, Gino Wickman wrote a book called Entrepreneurial Leap. And it's about, I just read it like a year ago. It's like, oh my God. And it's 6 traits of an entrepreneur. And he says, if you don't have all of these, don't even try. And I kept going through. I was like, oh, okay, I got that. So I'll just walk you through them. Visionary, having an idea nobody else has, but you also have to be able to execute it. Second one is passionate, and you got to be passionate about it. The third one, this is the most difficult for people. Not for me, because I would take all my money out of my house, my home equity loan, and put it in my business every year. It's called risk taker. That's the part. If you're not a risk taker, don't even try, because there's so many risks. There's so many things that happen. And I'll just explain a couple on this talk we've had. That risk taker is a really big one, and where a lot of people drop out. Driven is the next one. I kept reading my books about my great grandfather. I know he was driven. George Washington. Oh my God, that guy was so driven. Look at Elon Musk. There's drive and risk taking beyond incredible stuff that he does. And then responsible, which kind of goes without saying, and then problem solver. So if you don't have all those, according to Gino Wickman, who did the EOS program, don't even try. The thing that to me that I had to learn that I don't like is to read a financial statement.
Yeah.
So yeah. I had a sales background. Yeah. So if you don't have that gene, you're kind of like, oh, this is really struggled. I got to go through this. But I learned really quick. If I don't learn how to read that financial statement, I'm going to go out of business. I got to learn this thing backwards and forwards. and even be intuitive about when I first see it, where the problem is almost immediately. That you get so where you can't wait to see them, and you can't wait to see what happened and where the problem is, if there is one, or where something good happened. So I'd say learn how to read a financial statement, even if it's hard for you to do, or if you have a sales type background, you're not going to like that.
So, kind of, we're almost at that time. So in parting, I have one final question, and it's, you had a near-death experience. I don't know how, like, were you out? Did you not even were you mentally gone for a second and came back, or were you fading and then they brought you back?
None of the above. I never was out. I
Okay.
I never saw the light.
Okay.
Yeah, fortunately, my heart rate went to 30.
Wow.
So if you can imagine, you're normally 70. I could see myself turning white. I was like, okay, well, I'm dead. And then because my heart won't pump the blood to my brain, and I was like, it's it.
So you're there. Some people have the actual near-death experience and come back. What has changed in your personal life since that experience to now? Do you still get up at 6 a.m. and focus business? Are you kind of out of it now and just kind of focus on family? And obviously you wrote the book since then, and that's very key and critical, but have things changed for you in your day-to-day?
Telling my story is you get the future you plan for. And so if you plan, and it works in business, but it also works personally. So, and it's not fast. I mean, everybody thinks you're going to have a near-death experience. You're going to be a new person when you wake up. No, you got to work on it. You got to work on it. And relationships, to me, my relationships, we didn't go through the part where I got saved by my suppliers during the Great Recession, which was probably the most difficult thing I ever went through. But my relationship with my suppliers saved me during that period. My relationship with my wife has been incredibly important. She believed in me when nobody else did, and would say, I believe in you, keep going, because I was like going, I can't keep doing this. This is crazy. And so just those key relationships now with my kids, my employees, my vendors, my friends, how important those are. That's what I would tell you. If you get nothing out of this except that, how important that is.
Really, yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Really enjoyed this conversation. Learned a lot. So thank you.
Yeah.
I learned about hats. I learned a lot about hats.
Here in the closing few minutes, if you want, I'm happy to send out a dirty old ball cap or something like this if you'd like one. Or maybe we'll get you something a little fancier to go with that suit. But I wonder, Bew, here in the closing couple minutes, can you just give people a quick heads up where they can find the book, where they can learn a little bit more about you? If they chose to engage with your company in one way or another, what would be the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, probably most people are going to buy it on Amazon. That's where you get Audible that my roommate in college, who is an actor, producer, director, reads. He's pretty good. Michael Young is his name. So he reads the Audible. And then bewhite.com or summerclassics.com, summerclassicshome.com, or just Google Summer Classics and you'll get Gabby, Summer Classics, Wendy Jane, all the brands. Gabby is an indoor furniture brand that's on fire right now. So that's a pitch, but it's y'all. It's a millennial line like you guys, young guys.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bew. This has been awesome. And honestly, we could probably go on another hour. The stories that we touched on in this, it's just, you've got such a career and such a breadth of knowledge over so many years that, to pack it all into 1 hour is probably not doing you justice, but we do appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thanks. Hopefully your guys get something out of it. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. We'll see you guys next time.